The five-star restaurant, La Lumière, was packed. Golden light glinted off luxurious suits. 30-year-old Elara Voss, a discreet billionaire, entered with her 6-year-old son, Theo, seeking a quiet corner. Suddenly, Theo started crying, overwhelmed by the excessive noise. Waiters fumbled, patrons glared. A poor, plainly dressed man at the next table, Daniel Cole, a single father to 7-year-old Lily, turned. He leaned over, spoke a few soft words to Theo, and the boy instantly stopped. The entire restaurant watched. Elara was stunned. Lily whispered, "Help him, Dad." As Daniel stood to leave, Elara spontaneously rose and followed him out. She didn't stop to think. Elara Voss was the undeniable heiress of Voss Tech, a global technology conglomerate. Her personal wealth was staggering. However, she cultivated a strict habit of anonymity whenever she ventured into public spaces. Tonight, she wore no diamonds and drove a modest, unmarked sedan. She only wanted a simple, peaceful dinner with her son, Theo. Theo, a sweet boy, suffered from severe phonophobia, a crippling fear of loud sounds. This condition made everyday life, especially crowded public places, a constant battle for Elara. Elara's life was an exercise in extreme isolation. She managed Voss Tech from a heavily secured 80th floor office, issuing decisions that affected global markets. Yet she had no one she could call a true friend. Her social circle consisted of carefully vetted business partners and security analysts. The paradox was crushing. She possessed the capital to influence billions of lives, but she couldn't control the volume of the world for her own son. She had a full-time, round-the-clock staff, yet she felt utterly, profoundly alone. She yearned for authentic connection, not transactions. The restaurant's atmosphere, which usually signified luxury, felt like a cage to Theo. The clinking of glasses, the loud bursts of laughter from a corporate party, and the constant murmur of voices all coalesced into a terrifying auditory assault. Theo's anxiety was mounting. He tried to cover his ears. Then suddenly he released a distressed, piercing cry. Elara immediately went to him, trying every trick she knew, whispering, distraction, gentle pressure. None of it worked. She had consulted pediatric specialists worldwide, hiring the best money could buy, spending millions on custom sound-dampening equipment and specialized therapists. Yet the very best medical minds in the world had failed her, and her multi-million-dollar medical budget was useless against this simple, sudden crisis. The staff, trained to handle high-profile clients, started to show visible signs of irritation. They didn't dare approach the famous Voss family, but their disapproval was palpable. Then a well-dressed couple at the next table, unaware of Elara's identity, started whispering loudly enough to be heard. "Billionaires. All that money and they can't even control a 6-year-old. Terrible parenting." Elara heard every single word. The cruel judgment felt like a physical blow. Her heart constricted, shame washing over her. She was a CEO running a multi-billion-dollar empire, yet here she was failing at the only thing that truly mattered, being a good mother. She felt her empire shrink to the size of her single trembling hand holding her weeping son. It was then that Daniel, the plainly dressed man at the adjacent table, leaned over. His clothes were clean, but clearly worn, a sign of a person who budgeted for every single purchase. His voice was soft, cutting through the anxiety. "Excuse me, may I try something? Your son seems to be experiencing sensory overload." Elara was instantly guarded. She was accustomed to people offering advice only to gain favor or recognition. But Daniel's eyes held only genuine concern. In her desperation, she nodded slightly. Daniel moved with an unexpected grace. He lowered himself until he was perfectly eye-level with the crying boy. He didn't touch Theo, nor did he use a distracting toy. He simply spoke in a warm, low, and rhythmic voice. "Look at me, buddy. Just look at the way my chest moves. Now breathe like this. 1, 2. Theo, still sobbing, hesitantly focused on Daniel's steady, calming pattern. He began to imitate the deep, slow breaths. Within moments, the crying subsided. The panic attack broke. The entire restaurant, which had been holding its breath, let out a collective sigh. The simplicity of the intervention mocked the complexity of her wealth. Elara stared, paralyzed by astonishment. In months of therapy and expensive specialists, she had never seen Theo calm down so quickly. Daniel's daughter, Lily, smiled sweetly at Elara. "He's just like I was when I was little," she explained, holding her father's hand tightly. Elara watched Daniel closely. He said nothing more. He didn't linger for praise or introduce himself. He simply returned to his table, finished his meal with his daughter, and signaled for the check. As he got up to leave, Daniel said quietly to Lily, "Time to go home, kiddo." It was an instinct, a sudden, powerful, overwhelming impulse that Elara couldn't control. She stood up immediately and followed him out of the five-star restaurant, leaving their unfinished meal and the bewildered staff behind. She felt driven by a force stronger than logic. Outside, in the cool night air, Theo clutched the sleeve of her expensive cashmere coat. He looked up at her, his voice small but firm. "Mom, I want to go with him." The night air was sharp and cold. Daniel, noticing the chill, quickly draped his coat over Lily's shoulders. It was a simple, practical gesture of protection. He glanced down the street toward the bus stop. Elara caught up to them, her expensive heels clicking urgently on the sidewalk, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Wait, you! What did you just do to my son?" she demanded, still reeling from the shock of Theo's sudden calm. Daniel didn't flinch at her confrontational tone. He answered simply, without drama or exaggeration. "I've been raising a child like that for 7 years." The quiet, factual statement instantly disarmed Elara. It wasn't a boast. It was a truth. It made her realize she was dealing with a veteran, not a charlatan. They found a quiet public bench nearby, far from the glare of the restaurant. Lily, completely at ease, opened a small, foil-wrapped pastry, a takeaway from the dinner. She immediately tore it in half and offered one piece to Theo. Theo, still hesitant around strangers, accepted it, and a small, tentative smile appeared on his face. Daniel sat down between the children, his voice low and instructive. He explained his method calmly. He told Elara that children like Theo don't panic capriciously. They panic when their sensory systems are overloaded. He detailed how deliberate breath control acts like a circuit breaker, rapidly reducing the fight-or-flight response. He spoke of the importance of grounding, of finding a single calm point of focus in a whirlwind of noise. Elara listened, completely mesmerized. She wasn't just hearing advice. She felt like she was watching a highly specialized operator execute a critical task. She looked at him as if he held the key to a medicine she had been frantically searching for with all her wealth. She started dissecting his method using her corporate vocabulary. "So you optimize the autonomic nervous response through rhythmic auditory prompting? This is a high-efficiency biofeedback loop." Daniel tilted his head, smiling slightly. "It's just teaching her to smell the flowers, then blow out the candles, Elara. We call it parenting." He dismissed her corporate language, forcing her back to simple humanity. Daniel's story was one of quiet, absolute sacrifice. His wife had passed away shortly after Lily was born, and Lily had developed similar sensory issues as she grew up. Daniel, then a rising star in aerospace engineering, faced an impossible choice: his career or his daughter's stability. He chose Lily, stepping away from the six-figure salary and the prestige to become a full-time dedicated father. He had taken on multiple low-wage, flexible jobs just to be present for every panic attack and every school pickup. His current simple job barely covered the rent and Lily's needs, but he slept soundly, knowing his daughter was secure. Elara watched the quiet, focused attention he gave his daughter. Her own life, despite the glamour, was emotionally cold, surrounded by people paid to be there. Daniel's life was materially poor but rich in warmth. She realized the most profound difference. Daniel didn't know who she was. He spoke to her without the usual layers of deference, fear, or calculated charm that always surrounded her. For the first time in years, Elara felt simply seen, not revered. Daniel shrugged off the compliment. "I'm just a father trying to keep my kid afloat." No big secret. But his sheer authenticity struck a deep chord. It was warm, solid, and utterly unlike the brittle, performative sincerity she was used to. She realized her emotional poverty was far greater than his financial poverty. The criticism from the restaurant still echoed in her mind. Elara looked away, her voice sinking to a strained whisper. They looked at me like I was a terrible mother. Daniel turned, his gaze direct and unwavering. His voice was certain, brooking no argument. No, you're just doing it alone. The simple declarative statement hit Elara with the force of a confession. It was the hardest truth she faced every single day, the crushing burden of her solitary struggle. Daniel checked his inexpensive watch. He had to leave. The bus schedule was tight. It was good meeting you, but we really need to go. But Theo quickly reached out and clutched Daniel's trouser leg. Mister, can you come with me? Elara was astonished. Theo almost never initiated contact with strangers. Daniel gently peeled Theo's hand away. I'm just a stranger, kid. You need to stick with your mom. Driven by desperation, Elara blurted out the question, her pride abandoned. Can you teach me? Will you teach me what you know? I'm willing to pay any fee you set. Daniel let out a short, genuine laugh. It was a clear, uncomplicated sound. I'm no expert, ma'am. Expert. I'm just a dad. Elara's face became dead serious, matching her business demeanor. I have never seen anyone calm my son down that quickly. You have a skill I need. I am offering you a job. Daniel looked from the desperate pride in Elara's eyes to the yearning hope on Theo's face. He could see the stark, lonely reality of the woman who could buy anything but competence. He sighed, a subtle weariness touching his features. He gave a slight, decisive nod. Okay, I'll help you. Daniel led Elara and Theo not to a taxi, but through several dimly lit, narrow streets, eventually arriving at the modest, low-income apartment complex where he lived. The building was old, slightly faded, and smelled faintly of cheap detergent and cooking spices. His apartment was small, cramped, but undeniably warm. It was filled with Lily's brightly colored toys, stacked books, and the comfortable mess of real, working-class life. Elara looked around the tiny living room with undisguised envy. This small, crowded space felt more like a home than her expansive, sterile penthouse ever had. This genuine, lived-in warmth was the one thing her money couldn't buy. While Daniel efficiently started heating water for Coco, Lily excitedly pulled out her drawing pad to show Elara. The pages were covered in simple, joyful crayon pictures. Daddy, Lily, sunshine. They were unadorned representations of simple, profound happiness. Elara felt a tight, unexpected pressure behind her eyes. She almost wept, touched by the depth of their simple bond. Daniel settled onto the worn sofa, sitting beside Elara. He began his impromptu lesson, instructing her on how to read the subtle pre-panic cues in a child, the tensing of the jaw, the slight darting of the eyes, the rapid increase in heart rate. Elara took notes diligently on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to absorb the crucial, life-changing knowledge. Daniel glanced at her overly focused, intense expression and chuckled lightly. You don't need to be the CEO in this classroom, Elara. Just relax and be the student. Elara blushed fiercely. He didn't know how accurate that statement was. As they talked and the doorbell rang, Daniel frowned slightly, knowing the time of day. An older woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, the building superintendent, stood in the doorway, her expression weary. Daniel, you haven't submitted this month's rent yet. I need it by morning, or I'll have to serve you notice. I'm really sorry. Elara watched Daniel's face. He was clearly embarrassed, trying desperately to conceal the reality of his financial struggle from his daughter and from this powerful stranger. He managed a strained smile. I'll have it by 10 a.m., Mrs. Rodriguez. I promise. My paycheck is processing. The superintendent sighed, her eyes lingering on Elara's expensive coat for a moment before she left. A moment later, as Daniel moved to the kitchen, Elara overheard him quietly calling a friend. Yeah, I'm short on the rent again. I sold the last of my engineering textbooks today. I just need about 300 by morning. His voice was low, filled with quiet humiliation. Elara's heart twisted. Here was a man with genius-level talent, living paycheck to paycheck, yet he had prioritized her son over his own immediate needs. The disparity between his character and his circumstances was unbearable. She wanted to help, but feared the inevitable resentment or loss of respect her money would cause. Twist 1. the revelation of Daniel's past. Lily, oblivious to the adult tension, piped up from the corner, bursting with pride. My daddy used to be a chief engineer at a huge company, but he quit because my mommy got sick and he had to take care of me all the time. He gave up everything for me. Daniel coughed awkwardly, signaling Lily to stop talking, but the truth was out. Elara looked at him with a deeper respect. He hadn't left his high-powered career for burnout. He had sacrificed it all for love and duty. He was the opposite of every man Elara had ever known. He valued presence over power. Twist 2. The billionaire was always known later, after Lily and Theo had fallen asleep peacefully on the carpet, exhausted by the night's events. Daniel spoke. He reached out and gently touched Elara's gold-rimmed glasses. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you, Elara Voss? Elara froze, instantly rigid. You knew? Daniel nodded, a hint of weariness returning to his eyes. Not many people own the limited edition Voss Tech smart glasses you're wearing. I was an engineer, Elara. I recognized the design the second you sat down. He paused, his gaze softening. But it didn't matter to me then, and it doesn't matter to me now. You were just a mother whose kid was hurting. Elara let out a deep, shaking sigh, her armor finally cracking. She looked at him, not the brilliant engineer, but the simple, struggling father. I have the money. I have all the resources in the world. But my money is a shield that keeps everyone out. I have no one. No one truly sees me, Daniel. She confessed her deepest fear. I'm terrified that if I let someone close, they'll just see the company logo and not the person. My wealth created this distance. It's a gilded cage. Daniel held her gaze, his expression intensely genuine. You have your son, and you could have someone else if you wanted. Someone who doesn't care about the shares, only about the silence in your heart. Elara was stunned into silence. It was the first time that sentiment had ever been spoken to her, disconnected from her bank account or her corporate power. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted outside. The distinctive, blinding flashes of dozens of cameras lit up the alleyway. The paparazzi had found them. Someone at La Lumière had recognized the billionaire heiress following a man in cheap clothes and tipped off the media. They're here, Daniel said, his voice instantly shifting to a low tactical command. He grabbed his keys. Follow me, back exit. He took control, guiding the three of them, Elara, Theo, and Lily, through the cramped space. He shielded Elara and the children from the blinding lights and the aggressive shoving of the photographers, his body acting as a solid, protective barrier. Elara clutched his arm tightly, her voice thin with fear she hadn't felt since her earliest business takeover. You won't leave me, right? You won't let them have me? Daniel leaned close, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. I lead the way. You just hold on to me. We are getting out of here, Elara. Daniel scooped up both children and ran with Elara into the dark night. For the first time in her adult life, Elara felt profoundly and authentically protected. That tumultuous night, Daniel drove Elara and Theo to his closest friend's apartment, a safe, discreet location several districts away. It was a space that offered the anonymity and quiet sanctuary Elara's fortress-like penthouse could not. The first morning in the borrowed apartment was a study in contrast. Elara, the woman who commanded 100,000 employees, stared blankly at the stove. She was used to personal chefs and meticulously prepared vegan meals. She found a box of pancake mix and looked utterly confused. Daniel walked in, his shirt wrinkled from the previous day. He laughed gently. Need some executive assistance, CEO? Elara admitted sheepishly. I don't know how to do this. I've never cooked. Daniel didn't mock her. He patiently showed her how to mix the batter, explaining the measurements like a simple chemical formula. Elara followed his instructions, and when the first perfectly golden pancake emerged, she felt a surge of pride unlike any she'd felt from signing a multi-million-dollar deal. It was competence in a new, vital domain, domesticity. They sat on the worn, overstuffed sofa, eating simple food and playing simple board games with the children. Theo was radiant, his eyes brighter than Elara had seen them in years. Elara realized that Daniel's poverty wasn't a lack of resource. It was a radical choice of focus. He had traded financial complexity for emotional simplicity. Over the next few days, as the initial media storm subsided, Elara began to shed her corporate skin. She changed her tailored suit for Daniel's oversized sweater, which smelled faintly of earth and laundry detergent. She stopped monitoring the stock market and started monitoring Lily's progress on a drawing project. One afternoon, Daniel came home early from his delivery job. He found Elara sitting on the floor, patiently teaching Theo the smell the flowers, blow the candles breathing technique. He watched her from the doorway, realizing she was no longer the desperate client, but a loving mother finally equipped with the right tools. He walked over and sat beside her. Elara put the children down for a nap and turned to him. "I called my lawyers," she admitted quietly. "They're trying to set up a massive trust fund for you and Lily. Enough to solve everything. You can go back to engineering." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't want your trust fund, Elara. I don't want your money to fix my problems." He took her hands, his touch rough but incredibly warm. "I want you to be the reason I'm okay. I want us to be okay together." He paused, his gaze intensely sincere. "If I go back to that high-pressure job, I'll be the person you hated in the restaurant, distracted, absent. I chose Lily over a career once. I won't choose a salary over you or Theo now. I want to wake up next to the woman who can't make pancakes, but who still tried for my daughter," he murmured. "I want to be your partner." The declaration was simple, but its honesty felt like a physical wrench, tearing Elara's heart from its fortress. That evening, Elara cooked breakfast for Daniel and Lily, a simple plate of scrambled eggs and toast. It was a domestic act she hadn't performed for anyone, ever. Lily ran up to her, throwing her arms around Elara's waist in an unexpected fierce hug. "You smell like pancakes, Elara. You're like my mom." The words broke the dam. Elara's eyes immediately filled, and she started to cry. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. Daniel was instantly beside her. He took her hands, gently wiping away the tears. "You can stay longer," he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You can stay as long as you want." Elara looked up at him, her voice barely a shaky whisper. "I don't want to go anywhere else. I choose this couch over my mansion." 1 month later, Elara Voss officially moved out of her sterile penthouse. She didn't move Daniel into her mansion. Instead, she moved herself and Theo into Daniel's neighborhood, into a slightly larger 2-bedroom apartment nearby. She still ran Voss Tech, but she did it remotely, trading her 80th floor tower for a desk tucked in the corner of her new, humble living room. The change in Theo was staggering. He stopped flinching at loud noises. He went from calling Daniel Mr. Dan to Uncle Dan, and finally, after a week, he simply called him Dad Dan. When the words slipped out the first time, Daniel broke down and cried, unable to contain the overwhelming rush of emotion. Lily, watching the tenderness between them, decided to bestow her own honor. She hugged Elara tightly around the waist and declared, "Mamiela!" Elara froze, tears streaming down her face. She was the CEO of a massive corporation, yet she never believed she would hear the word mom spoken to her with such genuine, uncomplicated love. Daniel eventually found his way back into engineering. Elara used her connections to secure him interviews at top firms. Crucially, Daniel refused any special treatment. He interviewed on his own merit, determined to prove that his absence from the industry had not dulled his brilliance. He accepted a role as a lead developer, a challenge that utilized his mind without consuming his soul. They pooled their resources and bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. It had a lush flower garden and an old wooden swing set that Lily and Theo immediately claimed as their territory. Every evening, the four of them ate dinner together, sharing stories, laughter, and homework battles. Elara would often pause, watching Daniel gently correct Lily's math problem while Theo leaned against his shoulder. A profound, quiet realization settled in her heart. This is the dinner I have been waiting for my entire life. One evening, Daniel slipped his arms around Elara from behind as they watched the sunset over their new garden. "Why did you follow me out that night?" he whispered into her hair. "You had everything. Why risk it all for a bus ticket?" Elara smiled, leaning back against his chest, completely at peace. "Because for the very first time in my life, I saw someone who truly listened to me and truly loved my son." And I realized that the value of my wealth wasn't what it could buy, but what it allowed me to leave behind. The final image was perfect. The four of them sitting in the garden's sunset glow, hands clasped. They were no longer the solitary billionaire and the struggling single father. They were a family, forged not by fortune, but by choice. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to NL Touching Stories.